This is course video 26, and we're going to go back and review some things that you probably remember from Principles of Macroeconomics a long time ago. And one thing that I think everyone probably remembered is that output of the domestic economy is equal to Y, which stands for output. You remember this, it may be a while ago. I know, output Y, which is, of course is equal to income, which you would have spent some time figuring out using national income accounting, but we have income or output is equal to C stands for consumption, plus I stands for private investment, but let's start calling this ID to mean domestic investment. C plus I plus G is government spending, plus exports, and then don't forget to subtract imports. So let's just write these out. So we got C equals consumption, ID is domestic investment, and then G is government spending on goods and services, net of transfer payments, of course. We're looking at output. Nothing is expected in return for a transfer payment. So X, as we know, is exports, and M stands for the value of imports. So right there you can see the current account is in this because we've got X minus M here, so this is the current account. CA stands for the current account. So let's see what else we know. Well, we have a government. That means that there has to be some taxes to pay for the government. So another thing that's true about the government is that they subtract some money from the income or output. So Y minus T is usually referred to as disposable income. It's the income left over after the government's taken its cut in this sort of simple economy. They just take a slice of money off the top. So we got Y minus T, and then once you receive the income, the households either consume or save it. And so we can just express that as Y also equals C plus S plus T. So we have Y expressed two different ways. So let's set those equal and see what we've got. We've got C plus ID plus G plus X minus M is equal to C plus S plus T. So we've got C on both sides, so those cancel out, get rid of those. What else do we know? Well, we've got, let's take these two over to the other side. So we've got X minus M, which we know is the current account, is equal to, let's see, we've got T minus G. That might remind you of something. That's the government budget deficit, or the government balance, I should say. Why should I call it a deficit? Because maybe they have a surplus. So the government budget balance, so that's the taxes they collect minus the spending on government activities. So if taxes are bigger than government spending, we would say we have a government budget surplus. More typically, government spending exceeds taxes, so we have this deficit. So that's the government budget balance. And then we have plus S minus domestic investment. There's several different ways to think about this, but what you have here, let's just think of an example, and we'll do this in terms of percentage of GDP. Suppose that the government budget balance was 0, just for simplicity. Then what we're saying is the current account is equal to savings minus domestic investment. Let's say that we are a country that saves 5%, say, of our GDP, but we're currently spending 10% of our GDP on domestic investment. So we've got 5% minus 10%, that's negative 5%. That just says that with a balanced government budget, the current account must be a deficit of -5% of GDP to make this all balance. And so that's just another way of saying that part of how we end up with a current account deficit is because our savings are less than our domestic investment, and possibly we get a current account deficit. This was sometimes called the twin deficits debate, where you have this external deficit coupled with an internal deficit for the government. You may get a deficit on the current account because the government is deficit spending, and that has to be financed from abroad. So it's a sort of an insufficiency of savings idea, where the domestic savings has to cover domestic investment plus any kind of deficit spending on the part of the government, and any shortfall has to come from abroad. If you're a surplus country, maybe you have a very responsible government, very high rates of saving relative to your investment, and then in that case this would be positive. So you can see that this relationship between domestic savings and the things that you need to spend those savings on. You need to invest domestically, and you need to fund any shortfall in the government's tax collections. So some of the surplus countries, I think they're quite interesting. Like China has a current account surplus, and it has very high saving, and it's very tempting to think that countries with high rates of saving are sort of more moral, and some value judgment about the high saving countries versus the low saving countries. But just to play devil's advocate here a little bit, one of the reasons some countries don't have very high savings is they have very poor insurance markets. So if you're Chinese, you have a house, it may be difficult or impossible to get homeowners insurance. Health insurance may be difficult or impossible to get. So any kind of loss you experience, you're on your own. And countries like that with poorly developed insurance markets do tend to have high rates of savings. So high rates of savings in and of themselves are not necessarily virtuous. And then the other way, if you want to get, further play devil's advocate, one of the things that might happen is that foreigners see investing in the US maybe as more desirable than investing in their own country. So you may find that capital will flow in because people like investing in what they see as a very dynamic economy. And so I wouldn't get involved in acting like some countries have the moral high ground here, because low savings may result for a variety of reasons, and then also high rates of investment in a country may be a sign of strength. But just to sort of summarize, this is the government budget balance. If we have a big deficit where government is really big relative to taxation, if savings is small relative to domestic investment, then we will end up with a current account deficit with money flowing in. If we have a budget surplus or a balanced government with a sober type of government, and if we have high rates of domestic saving and relatively low rates of domestic investment, then money will flow out, and we will have current account surpluses with domestic capital outflows. So that's one of the other ways of thinking about the relationship between the external sector, the current account, and what's going on internally in terms of all these decisions, in terms of what the government's doing and how much we tax ourselves and how much we save and how much we and other people want to invest in the country.